Good for immunity. So I've got some echinacea tea with a little bit of local honey from Sedona, Arizona.
Ooh,
Ooh, yeah, it's hitting the spot. Change my light down a little bit. Sounds like you're outside and like I hear like crickets.
is that going to be a problem? I can shut the door. No, I'm inside, but dude, they're ripping it
Yeah,
out there. They're chainsawing.
it adds to the cave
Okay.
vibe. I would say for you to have some crickets chirping in the background, but it feels weird. It's like we have to get back into the cadence of this thing. We were getting into the flow, and we took a little bit of time off, not by just through circumstances, and we missed our Monday call, our brainstorming. No, we didn't. We ended up getting back onto the Monday call, which is talking
Yeah.
about um, kind of the overall plan. And I would say that this would fall nicely into a micro series that we're going to talk about. I think everything that I was giving some thought about our Monday call, just about packaging this content up in micro series, whether it's the nutritional modality, fitness modality, or mentalities that we're talking about, keeping them in a consistent frame, if you will. And I would say that where we're at right now with our latest development in getting back into a cadence of doing these things has really been about the beginnings of the path and sort of beginning phases, if you will, nothing too complex, just your base level, basic building blocks of nutrition. What are your basics that you need? But really, it seems like everything that we've talked about so far has been sort of like orientation, whether it's your mentality or your fitness modalities or your nutrition. It's really been kind of like a. I feel like we're the micro series that we could be talking about right here would be sort of like an alignment phase, if you will, like a restructuring your orientation within your approach to fitness, mentality, and nutrition. And so, with that being said, I was uh, I was giving some thought as to how to kick this thing off, and that clearly didn't work. But I have you ever seen the movie Run, Ronnie, Run?
No.
Okay, one of the greatest pickup lines I think I've ever seen in a movie. Where have you? Do you remember the? Do you remember back in the day, like way back in the day? I'm talking '90s. There was a show called Kids in the Hall on
Canadian,
MTV.
right?
Yeah, you're you're looks like your connections. We're losing your connection a little bit. Got you all fuzzy a second ago.
Oh,
Maybe
weird.
it's Google, but I can't remember the name of the actor, but he walks up. So basically, he's at a party. So Run, Ronnie, Run is David Cross, Bob Odenkirk. Okay, like HBO. I think they made their cut their teeth in comedy on HBO, but it's just sort of a funny comedy about this guy that it's based off of a character in Mr. Show, I think, which was a series on HBO back in the day, like early 2000s, I think. But long story short, this guy becomes famous, and he has all these famous Hollywood people over at his show and or over at his house. And one of the guys, I think it's one of the guys from Kids in the Hall, comes up and he's like he's pretending like he's straight, so he's trying to hit on some females, and he walks up to a group of nice looking females like Hollywood models or something like that, and he says, "Ladies, you have really nice posture." And it always kind of like stuck with me. Is like that's a nice thing to say to somebody, you know. You have nice posture. And if you think about like in the book 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson, he goes into that I think in the very first chapter. I mean like yeah, lobsters exactly. So orienting yourself in the world, I mean just sitting up like stand up straight with your shoulders back. And so our fitness modality for this week, we're talking about the kinetic chain, and I thought that it was a useful tie-in to think about. And I read your article at leftcoastcaveman.com about the posture and about these different kind of modalities that you talk about and different. And it'd be really cool if you accompanied that article with some videos, because I went through it and I was doing, like you were saying, the standing position and kind of like doing those body checks of keeping your kinetic chain, you know, checking in on your kinetic chain. So it's a good, it's a useful mechanism, I would say, for just like a base level before you're getting into strength. This came up when we were doing some jujitsu, but I think about it all the time. I think about it when I'm doing striking. I think about it when I'm doing exercises now. All the time, I'm thinking about, all right, check in with my kinetic chain and how is everything aligning. So a useful base level, again, if we're talking about like kind of base level nutrition or fitness, an important one to introduce to the audience.
Yeah. I mean, posture is one of those things. It's a continued practice, and I'm sure now that it's more top of mind, I've been obsessing about it for quite a while now. And I mean, every day, certain points of the day, I'll catch myself in that kyphotic, that hunched over, just looking down a little bit, like with my T-Rex hands. I mean, it's just amazing how many points of the day you find yourself reverting back to that position. It's like, I got to realign. I got to throw the shoulders back. I got to, align the head backwards with the spine a bit, right? Like not allow it to look down. I mean, a little bit of downward, orientation isn't bad, but oftentimes it's exacerbated by this total flexion right here of the cervical spine. Not great. And I feel like a lot of people end up getting certain, headaches, and their neck starts hurting, and the rest of the body responds to that, and to go back to the Jordan Peterson piece, right? I mean, obviously he talks about lobsters, but one of the cool psychological phenomena out there, and I'm sure you've heard it before, is if you smile even when you're not happy, you'll confuse the brain in a way. You almost convince yourself just by that act, by that muscular orientation, your brain will interpret it as happiness, and you'll actually feel happier. Like, I'm not saying it's going to solve your problem, but it's one of those things. I try doing that from time to time as well. I think it does work. I mean, who knows? Maybe it's just a cool psychological trick, but getting into that proper posture, I think it helps with with your voice. If you're gonna be doing a speaking engagement of something, whenever we talked about this before. Whenever I do any sort of I have to present some material, and be it in Zoom or in person, but more so in Zoom, I'll stand up and I'll throw the shoulders back a little bit and project the voice more so. And I think it's a confidence thing as well, right? You're not approaching your cohorts from this, and you think about the basic position of being crunched over. I mean, that's like a defensive posture, right? You don't want to be presenting information from a place of defense, meaning like you feel like you're going to be, somebody's going to punch you or something, or you're feeling very vulnerable. You want to come from a place of openness, throw the shoulders back, open the body up, project confidence. And I really do feel like it does affect, once again, could be majority of it like psychological? Sure. But I think there's something to it as well, from coming from not only the psychological perspective, but also the physiological of projecting confidence and not necessarily aggressiveness, but sometimes it is good to throw some aggressiveness, especially when you're spitting facts and you've got some material that you want to share with everybody. You want people to take you seriously, and who knows, maybe you'll engage in some sort of dialogue, a debate, if you will, which that's awesome. But I think if you're going to be doing that, definitely from a position of power, not from a position of empowerment, not from a position of defense.
Absolutely, and that's so it almost bleeds a little bit into the mentality piece. So Left Coast Caveman, every single week we talk about a fitness modality, nutritional modality, and a mentality, and it's sort of, you can see how that's interconnected. And I think Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life really goes into like the psychological factors there. But one thing you talk about in your article at leftcoastcaveman.com, and it's one of the featured articles right now. I'll put it in the link in the description. But I think you do a nice job of just talking about sort of the habitual habits that can lead to some of these ailments, and not recognizing it, whether it's like you're just hunching over at your desk or doing things ergonomically incorrect. And I think on the flip side of that, it's how often do you check in and do things ergonomically? Like, how often do you take physical note of the kinetic chain? And I love that you use the word chain, and you even talk about that in the article. And like, if you envision a chain, and like you and I are both cyclists as well, if you get a kink in that chain, like what's going to happen? You're going to lose power in your drivetrain. And that's something that we noticed too in jiu-jitsu, is that, just tweaking that kinetic chain a little bit, you lose a lot of power. And so some of the things that I do frequently is like every morning, that's the first thing I'll do is I'll go out to my infrared light and I'll just lay flat on the mat. I'll lay flat on a concrete ground, and I pay attention to the fact that like my lower lumbar wants to kind of curve up off the ground, and I'll purposely flatten that out. And like I'll grab the back of my neck and kind of like straighten out that chain, and you can feel the pops and the kinks kind of working out. And I'll align my shoulders, and I have lines taped onto my mat so that I can make sure my arms are perfectly aligned and my feet are perfectly aligned, and kind of just spend time in a perfect alignment position. And I do the same like with doing stretching or doing yoga or mid exercise, doing the same thing, like constantly checking in on the kinetic chain and making sure that there's alignments there, kind of as a mechanism to combat some of the things that we all do, whether that's like always looking down at your phone, which isn't, you're out of alignment, or just little things like I'll sometimes sit like this, or you know what I mean, like sitting like this, or driving like this. And it's like all of those things are positions of, like, I would say kinetic dysfunction or ergonomic correctness, if that's even a word to use. So yeah, checking in with it often, clearly, a daily habit, I would say, like in terms of implementation of this practice. Find ways to implement it every single day, and you check in with it often throughout the day.
Yeah, and it's really it's like a newer malady that's affecting almost all of us, and it's from accumulation of these positions, right, all throughout the day. And you think about how you spend your day. Many of us are now office workers, right? Many of us are now working from home, and you think about how many hours you spend in one position. That accumulation, your body adapts to it, right? And so it's creating compensation, and it's almost.
I'm listening to you. I just had to grab
okay. Yeah, and it's almost. I think nowadays it's becoming a strategy we all must take, is how to undo all that posturing that we fall into when working. I mean, not all of us can stand all day while working. Not all of us have those computers where it lifts up and down and you can adjust that perfect posture. And many of us, if you're a truck driver, or if you're commuting, or if you're any of that, there's no negotiating necessarily on those positions that accumulate over time throughout the week. And you think that you're going to reverse it out by an hour a day of physical activity. I don't think that's. It's better than nothing, and that's what a lot of us do. We take the bet on that, saying, hey, that's the least I can do. But I think like being more proactive throughout the day of how to try to undo it. I like that practice you mentioned of doing that drawing in technique where you get that lumbar spine and you press it down to the ground, right? And it probably feels really good too. I'm sure you notice that, like in your low back, or so like how to reverse out all these accumulated maladaptive positions that we find ourselves in throughout the day. And that's probably going to be a science in itself, as more and more of us are injured. I think lower back pain is probably the most common complaint when people go to the doctor. Think about that. I think the next is knee pain. It's all related though, from the toes up, that whole kinetic chain. And I think that's an apt analogy to use, that chain of, and I look at it from, the spine being like the midpoint of it and straight up and down. And if you check in from toes to top, and in that article, I talked a little bit about just some quick, practices for doing that, like how you're standing, how wide are your knees bowed inward? Are they bowed outward? Looking at your hip, is it anteriorly flexed forward from, a lot of us get that from sitting all day. So, checking with that, your lumbar spine, your T-spine, your thoracic spine, your cervical spine, your neck, your head, like all these things, checking in and seeing, and you'll feel it. Like once you devote a little bit of consciousness to it, you'll see like, oh yeah, like, and you throw your shoulders back and you try to push your hips down, like posteriorly tilted a bit. You'll feel it go, oh yeah, okay, yeah, that feels good. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's probably not a comfortable position to be in all day long. And that's not right. But you can just feel that what you're doing, I feel like is like reversing out a little bit of what you've been in that accumulated posture all day long. And, other great ways to approach it by, I mean, anytime you pick up a weight, I think it's important to think about those kind of things, like how, and you'll notice, man, when you're doing a squat, if your squat's off, say you're not gripping the ground with your feet, or your feet are too far wide or not wide enough. I mean, you'll feel a detriment to your power production. So it's like, once you get that kinetic chain lined up, and it's different for everyone too. And it's really interesting to look at like people's hips. And, some people say, you have to squat in this position with your hips out or the knees in. It's different for everybody. Everybody's hips is a little bit different, right? So there's huge human variability there. But you'll find once you get into that comfortable zone, like which one is correct. And there's a lot of great content out there. And I don't have the knowledge to go through all of those ones for different body types. But, I think the key takeaway here is if you align that kinetic chain prior to working out, prior to giving a presentation, you align it throughout the day. I think that's somewhat helpful in trying to reverse out some of that accumulation.
Absolutely, yeah. And you can, we'll start posting. We should both post a lot of just little quick, even like 5-second shorts on things that you do. I mean, like there's little things that I do. Like sometimes I'll kind of do like this and like push my chin back, and like I'll grab like what my parotid glands are and kind of like stretch up, and I'll do like these throughout the day. And like you can like, even as we're talking about it, I get conscious of it. I'm like, I'm sitting like this. And then I'm like, oh shit, like it's different when you stand up or when you sit up and you actually start to recruit some of those muscle groups too, like your core and your back, and how much of those muscle groups are you neglecting through just bad posture and not remaining conscious of it, like you said. So yeah, we should, and it would be interesting to delve into as a follow-up to this, kind of the chiropractic field of the musculoskeletal system, and what are some of the benefits of that, and maybe some of those things that you can mitigate through constant attention to your kinetic chain. But yeah, I incorporate it with every single workout, incorporate it throughout the day, incorporate it on those things that you do, like driving, sitting at the desk. So there's so many different like cave implementations, I would say, of this, but just being conscious of it is a good start. And
if I could just, I want to outline something that I thought was unfortunately I don't have the circular representation of this circle of like the cycle, but I want to share this out. It's called the pain compensation cycle, and it starts out, I'll start it out with the postural fault, because it's germane to what we're talking about, and it could start from anywhere on that cycle. But this is kind of the outline. What happens when, say, you approach, say, a sport, or you approach, a lift or whatever with a poor posture, right? So it starts. You got your postural fault, right? And so what that does, that leads to altered joint mechanics. So what that means is your joints now aren't moving in the way that they were designed to move, or they're moving at a weird angle, and you might be recruiting synergistic muscles that should be helping, not primarily moving, right? And then you go to what happens from there is you'll end up with reduced mobility, reduced stability, reduced strength. As we demonstrate with jiu-jitsu, when you pull the head out of alignment, it degrades their ability to produce like meaningful force and to escape the position. And so this also could lead to excessive loading stress on certain parts of the body, on joints, on tendons, on ligaments. Potentially lead to inflammation. We all know that inflammation unchecked over time, especially the not the productive type of inflammation, leads to pain and injury. And then before you know it, you've got some sort of movement compensation, and then you have a systemic imbalance. And I feel like many of us, myself included, even though I pay attention to this, many movement compensations, just from that over time of, especially as you get older, you start accumulating some of these injuries over time. Say you blow out your knee, or you have a shoulder injury from bench pressing like an idiot when you were a kid. Well, you're compensating for that from the other side, and you can't always tease out and ameliorate all of those things. But it's just what I really like about that cycle is it just shows you how quickly something as simple as postural fault, just a poor posture, can really spin out of control over time. Now, of course, this isn't just one exercise. Your last set of squats, you kind of did it shitty. You went, to one angle this is just an accumulation of this. And what I think is most nefarious, and this was kind of eye-opening to me, is the fact that it's not always just a matter of the accumulation of, sitting down all day. It's not just a matter of lifting weights poorly all day. I mean, think about when you're out there, say you're a golfer, right? So you spend, a couple days a week on the links, and you're caught, doing that motion of golf, right? Where you're driving it down there. I mean, over time, that itself can start accumulating postural faults. It could start creating compensations. Before you know it, you're in pain. You're like, what the fuck's going on here? I'm doing the right thing. I'm being active outside. We have to find ways to kind of undo whatever movement compensations, or like you might start developing certain muscles that are really great for driving that ball down the green. But when it comes to just every day, sitting and having posture, I'm like, oh, dude, you're all crunched over now, or you might be imbalanced in other muscle groups. So something to think about, and I need to think about more as well when I'm designing my programs for fitness. It's like, okay, if I'm doing a lot of jujitsu and maybe they have a lot of positions where I'm hunched over, or where I'm on my back to the sides, like, well, how do you undo those? Like throwing in some exercises or periodizing some sort of training that can help undo some of the sports related movement patterns that might become overdeveloped.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good introduction to I think a good core topic. And on the same note, I think tying nicely to our nutritional modality this week, and you mentioned sort of the chronic inflammation as being a result of those, like a misuse of those joints, or just not doing any kind of work to mitigate some of the damage that you're doing to those joints. Similarly, I think a lot of people, myself included, I mean, thinking about what we've talked about over the last couple of weeks of when is it time to take a reset? When is it time to really like hit the pause button on everything that you're doing, and be cognizant of what am I doing, and is this contributing to my better well-being on my path or not? Sometimes when I get those things like I don't feel like working out, I'm craving sugar, I'm craving more alcohol, I'm feeling more pain throughout my body. I don't have that boost of energy that has sort of become a reputation of mine, so to speak, almost just like that, just crazy amounts of energy, right? I sort of, if I'm feeling sluggish throughout the day, if I don't feel energized by my path, and I doubt seeps into my mind, I'm purposely kind of painting a picture of like a broad scope, right? Of a spiral of ailments, let's call them, like things that people deal with. I'm not focused enough. I can't. Is that dog that's
Yeah, let me
hanging
shut
out
the
the
door.
window? You know what I mean? Like all of the things that people talk about in terms of ailments, this is kind of similar on that line of the kinetic chain, is gut health. Because so many people think that somebody told me recently that we essentially have three brains: our heart, our brain, our heart, and then our gut. And we could spend all day talking about our gut health, but one thing so we were talking about broths and making homemade broths and purposely incorporating within those broths more of like muscle meat, or less muscle meats, and more of like tendons and sinews and things of that nature that primitive man and woman would have eaten as part of their regular diet. And I think a lot of people neglect that in their diet right now. They just go about their life eating food, even if you're eating healthy. Like I would consider myself a relatively healthy guy, but I can tell you right now, like I'm overdue for a gut reset. Like just repairing the gut lining through a bone broth fast, or a brothing fast. And that's sort of what I focused my attention on this week. And I was actually sipping on this tonight. Some of this, let me see if I can turn this off. Wait, where is it at? Can you see that? So we've already talked about mushroom nutrition, right? Well, I found some nice broth by Ohm Nutrition, and some interesting facts that I'd found in looking into that. I'm gonna post two recipes that I've done in the past of making a homemade broth, where I just get like a big rack of bones. Oh, where'd you go? Uh-oh. We lost Nick. I'll keep it going. There you are.
Had to restart. Sorry.
No, it's all good. So the difference between doing something like this, the packs of bone broth or the ancient nutrition bone broths that I texted you that from the store the other day, and I'll post along with this. I'll cut in some of like the screenshots that I took of all the different broths that are out there. Is the gelatin factor. So like the homemade broths are going to have a lot higher content of the gelatin and glycine, that come out of like the slow seeping of the bones. So you don't just boil it for like an hour or so. Like I'll post the process at coastcaveman.com under the nutritional section. I will, but you basically just slow simmer these things like overnight. Throw in some liver, throw in some organ meat, but basically like the bone, the boiling of the bone overnight on a slow simmer releases all of that gelatin and glycine and stuff like that helps repair that gut lining. I'm just going to keep it rolling. Helps repair your gut lining. And over time, if you're eating just regular standard American diet, there's evidence to suggest that the permeability of your gut, I'm talking about like the permeability of your gut, like allowing toxins in, is kind of similar to what we're talking about with the kinetic chain, where it's like not paying attention to that has like creates a systemic like storm of ailments that can impact you in a variety of different ways, whether that's like inflammation, depression, anxiety, you name it. Like all of these things can be related to your gut health, gut permeability, allowing toxins into your gut. And one good way to restore that is going on like a 2 or 3 day bone broth fast.
Now, can you still get the benefits of the regeneration without doing the fast by just consuming, say, an increased amount of the bone broth throughout a few days, or including that in your diet more often throughout the week? Or do you have to have that component of fasting? And what does the fasting do?
I think the fasting would the benefit to the fasting piece. I mean, it's a great question. I think that yes, you still get the benefits of all of like the amino acid profile, the glutamine, the glycine, the gelatin, all of these things that are typically not found in even, I would say, like a healthy individual's diet, because a lot of people aren't consuming organ meats and things of that nature that are rich in these components, these nutritional components. So yeah, it's good, but I think the benefit of like the fast, going on like a 2 or 3 day fast, is that healing process. It's like that restoration, because that gut, if you're consuming things on a regular basis, like alcohol consumption, caffeine consumption, these things that we all do, and you're not removing that from your diet and then going on the repair mode, that it's not going to fully heal. Because this is anecdotal, let's say, but a buddy of mine, Joe Carr, turned me on to this, and I'll post along with this video I have my process for making it. I'll put it at coastcaveman.com, and then I also just documented what I was experiencing. And I mean, I experienced a resetting of my energy, a resetting of some of my senses. Even like I could smell better, I could taste better. It was like I could definitely feel like the gut brain connection in that restoration process. And I think it's important to like 2 or 3 times a year to just reset all of that, reset those functions.
Yeah, and I think just looking at some of the articles and content I digested, pun intended, on intermittent fasting. Funny. And that was essentially one of the benefits of it, is to give your digestive system a break from constant consumption, right? So it's like a car that's always running. You're constantly redlining it. It's always idling in the background. Sometimes it's good to give it a rest, allow it to cool down a little bit. I mean, specifically with the body, allowing your body to repair as opposed to always be running at all times. Because if you drive your car nonstop, it's gonna break down much sooner than the car that you you rest intermittently, right? Then you drive a little bit and then you stop, right? Just like everyday practice. But if you're driving it all day long every day, it's going to break down much sooner. And I think the body operates in that same way. And that's one of the benefits of it. It just allow that all the digestive systems in your body to just heal and recover. We know we're all made of cells. Those cells regenerate, they replenish, they destroy themselves, and they create new cells. And it's this fantastic system. But it doesn't get a chance to do all that if it's constantly running. And so that's why I'm a big subscriber of intermittent fasting. I have never done one of those long-term fasts, probably because I'm just not disciplined enough. Or more than anything, honestly, my greatest fear about a multi-day fast is I don't know if I mean, like going to jiu-jitsu, how would that work? Or would my work suffer? I don't know. I mean, it'd be interesting. I should try it one day. I'm still a little apprehensive because I feel like there'd be such a decrement to my training. But also, hey, it's only 3 days, so maybe I'm just making excuses here.
Yeah, I think that when I did it, I mean, you make a good point, and that's usually, I think that's why I haven't done it. And I think when I posted the video was March of 2021 was the last time I've done one. So that tells you it's almost been 2 years. And so for the same reason, it's like, well, why do it? Why reset? Why hit the reset button? And especially when you feel, I mean, we've been talking a lot lately about being on the path, and this, again, it all ties to the mental piece of it. Is when do you feel like you need to do a reset? Why would I need to do a reset if I feel like my energy's right? But I haven't the last couple of days. I've been kind of on burnout mode. But are there some things in your life occurring? Let's say once a week you write down, you make note of what are the things in my life that are going well, what are the things in my life that maybe I could see improving. That was why I embarked on this broth fast the first time, was just because, I mean, there's a reason why fasting is almost part of like every world religion, let's call it, or like it's integral to spiritual practice as well. And we've talked about this on the cast before about like make slave the body, make civil the mind. It's like there's an element of going through it, gut healing aside, just to discipline yourself to get more in tune with your mind. And I do firmly believe that there's also a mind-body connection, that as you remove those toxins from your body is a marvelous machine of cleaning itself. And like if you're only giving it, and we've already talked about over the last two casts when we dove into nutrition or hydration, just the pretty robust nutritional properties of broth. So if you're only taking on this, mineral dense, vitamin dense, electrolyte dense substance if you make it at home, even better. If you're in a pinch, we should do some, as part of this micro series of resetting or beginnings, let's call it, or some kind of like assessment of your alignment on your path. Do some kind of, if you're in a jam, what are those brands that are really good? There's a couple of them that come to mind. I mean, there's Om Nutrition. Obviously, we like mushrooms here on the cast. LCC, we subscribe to. I think Om is a great brand because it includes in it some gourmet mushrooms that would also help that mind-body connection. The lion's mane mushrooms in it. I think it's reishi mushrooms in it. A lot of antioxidants and gelatin in some of those mushroom fruiting bodies as well. There's also Fond makes one, and Bonafide Provision makes the bone broth that are also highly recommended on the Interline webs. But I think that, there's a component of the mentality piece that goes along with a good fast too. Of taking like 2 days to say, well, maybe I don't train. You train. Maybe you can pick up those 2 days of training another time and really spend that time of assessing your path. And what are you doing on your path? And what are those alignments? And what are those things that maybe are out of alignment that are holding you back from getting to that next phase on your journey that you're striving towards?
Yeah, there's something to that, because I mean, think about any time you've been sick, right? And I'm sure we've all had our bouts with different illnesses over the last few years. And think about getting sick, and say you get sick to a higher degree than usual. Maybe you're sick for 2 weeks, right? Where you're just low energy and whatnot. And so you're not training. You got 2 weeks of not training, got 2 weeks of probably not, your appetite's not as robust. So you're not eating as much, probably sleeping a lot, you're recovering. And then you go back, you hit the gym, you go back to the mats, you go back to your running. And I don't know about you, man, but every time that's happened to me, and I'm always afraid, like the whole time I'm stressing about losing gains, and people are getting better, ahead of me. Because they're getting those extra sessions in. My mind goes these fucking dark places about that stuff. Where fucking Joe Smith is getting better. He's working his guillotines this week. Fuck him. I'm missing out on this knowledge, all the secret squirrel stuff. But honestly, when he come back, I've noticed it with running. I've noticed it with jujitsu. I've noticed it with weightlifting. Usually your first session back, assuming that you're at a good place where you've healed up, it's usually pretty goddamn good.
Yeah.
The run didn't tax me as much, or man, I'm clear on that. I mean, I've noticed it in those 3 planes. I don't know if you've got any anecdotes as well. You've noticed that, but just from sickness, from and abstainment from working out. So,
Well, I think it's because we get, and this ties so nicely into the mentality piece I wanted to share with you today. Because I just started on this book that was after. Let me say that before I dive into that, I want to say that I remember a trainer once telling me, "Don't ever forget, you don't get better in here, the gym. You don't get stronger in here, the gym. You get stronger when you go rest." And a lot of the times we forget that because we're so in the mix of it, and we have that little sense of anxiety of like, well, I'm going to lose ground if I stop. And that's always part of the mentality piece too. It's like, well, how can you focus that time and attention on something else that can improve your path? And there is something to that whole rest period and coming back stronger. But I think it also has to do with like how much of our existence is full of preoccupations that we don't even really understand. And so I just got introduced to this book after I talked to you about the meeting that I had this week, where the coincidences with these 2 individuals I met, where it's like, okay, I met this lady in the Newport Beach, and then she introduced me to somebody else who's working on a project to develop an energy supplement or an energy product that aligns with our path. And she just so happens to have previously worked for the U.S. Air Force in the LCC. And I'm like, oh, wow, the LCC also happens to be the acronym of our project, and talking about that, and there being so many different similarities there. And then and so much of that has been happening lately. And I was telling somebody else about that, and he goes, "Oh, you need to check out the book, The Celestine Prophecy. Have you heard of it?"
no, it sounds cool though.
Okay, can I play a clip? Can I play a couple clips of it? All right, let me see if I can cue this up to play a couple clips of it. All right, let's test the audio here. Explain. Let me get connected. Can you hear that dinging?
Yep.
But the priest put it this way. He said the first insight occurs when we become conscious of the coincidences in our lives. She leaned toward me. Have you ever had a hunch or intuition concerning something you wanted to do? Some course you wanted to take in your life, and wondered how it might happen? And then, after you had forgotten about it and focused on other things, you suddenly met someone or read something or went somewhere that led to the very opportunity you envisioned? Well, she continued, according to the priest, these coincidences are happening more and more frequently, and that, when they do, they strike us as beyond what would be expected by pure chance. They feel destined, as though our lives had been guided by some unexplained force. The experience induces a feeling of mystery and excitement, and as a result, we feel more alive. The priest told me that this is the experience that we've glimpsed and that we're now trying to manifest all the time. More people every day are convinced that this mysterious movement is real and that it means something, that something else is going on beneath everyday life. This awareness is the first insight.
So he talks about the first insight, and he was talking about. Could you hear that clearly?
Yeah.
So, talking about these coincidences that happen on your path, and you and I have talked about that before as like a key indicator that you're on the right path. Like the absence of those would be a good time. Like if you're not having that happen in your life, you and I have talked about that as being like an indicator that maybe it's time to do a reset. Like I don't remember having that when I was just doing the corporate gig and focused on money and creating more success for myself and these kind of things. Like it required getting outside myself to think about what am I creating, whether it's a legacy or just a worthwhile objective or an ideal life. We've talked about this and part of the planning cast of like, what is your ideal vision of how life should go? And then as you start like laying planks towards that, as things start coming to you in these coincidences as like being a key indication of you being on your path. But this book is really interesting, and I think it's nonfiction, or I think it's fiction, but it's talking about it how like there's this great awakening of consciousness happening right now that was predicted a long time ago, and that is as the traditional fundamental systems of thought start to break down that have moved civilization into where it is right now, as those structures kind of start to break down, that the individual starts to then seek out their path, if you will. But there's a couple other clips that I wanted to play real quick. But first of all, do you have any kind of like jumping out at you thoughts about that? Just that first little bit.
Well, I love the fact that, I mean, right in the beginning of it, when it talked about not ignoring the coincidences or the accumulation of the coincidences and trying to connect those. And I think that's super powerful. I mean, you got two choices. You can either live in a world of magic or you can live in a world of, I don't know, just fucking random chance occurrences. And I mean, I like to live in both, but the magical one is more fun. And also, I think once you start connecting these quote unquote magical occurrences, coincidences, it might lead you somewhere. And and there's power in that. The mind's amazing in its way to operate on the subconscious cues it's picking up on that maybe you're not able to interpret with logic, but like it's leading you somewhere. You're picking up on something that you're not quite seeing. And I try to pay attention to those. And I think there's something cool to it. I don't know. It's more fun to live that way, I think.
Yeah, and if you're not seeing those in your life, I would say that's an indicator of possibly you're falling into like what he's about to talk about next. So there's two more little clips that I highlighted. Let me see. And I just got into this book today, so I'm barely through it. But let me see if there's any reason why I highlighted these two. Hopefully, it gives us a zinger or two.
I stepped into the aisle, and then I slid back into the window seat, and Dobson sat beside me. "Tell me what you heard concerning the first insight," Dobson said. I paused for a moment, trying to sum up in my mind what I understood. "I guess the first insight is an awareness of the mysterious occurrences that change one's life, the feeling that some other process is operating." I felt absurd as I said it. Dobson picked up on my discomfort. "What do you think of that insight?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "It doesn't quite fit with our modern-day common sense, does it? Wouldn't you feel better dismissing the whole idea and getting back to thinking about practical matters?" I laughed and nodded.
So he's kind of getting into kind of like the way people think in response to stuff like that. And you were talking about kind of And we both kind of talked about it a little bit here of just like being the preoccupations, but like the preoccupations of our lives. And so he gets in. That's all about like the first insight. Then is about recognizing that there's this insight or there's this occurrence that's happening to more and more people. And I feel like this is happening. Like as I start to study what's going on in social media, and I start to understand like even our context within the holistic health and wellness space, and people wanting to get more in touch with like ancestral type living. That's where he starts talking about the like why would people even do that, and he's starting to talk about that coming up next. And it's I have a feeling this is going to be a really game changing book. But let me grab that one real quick. One, it's at 101:27, 15 minutes later. 101:27.
Of why we were alive, of what was actually going on here spiritually, was slowly pushed aside and repressed altogether. We totally lost ourselves in creating a secular security, an economic security, to replace the spiritual one we had lost. The question of why we were alive, of what was actually going on here spiritually, was slowly pushed aside and repressed altogether. He looked at me intensely, then said, "Working to establish a more comfortable style of survival has grown to feel complete in and of itself as a reason to live. And we've gradually, methodically, forgotten our original question. We've forgotten that we still don't know what we're surviving for."
So yeah, man.
Yeah, that's a good one. What are we surviving for?
Yeah, like, because we talk. So what I didn't grab in that was he was sort of started to break down. All right, in the second intuition that he calls it, or what's the second instinct, or the second insight is like understanding where we're at today with the relationship to our past. And he talks about how like the history of like organized religion like would tell you what you're doing here, what you believe, and why you're alive, and what's the purpose of this all. And then like Martin Luther came around and said like this is bullshit, and started like seeing through like these people are just human too, and this doesn't make sense, and this doesn't add up. And like starting to break down the organized religions and just organized thought, and like we're starting to see like a widespread recognition of everybody's on their own path, and you're on a path and I'm on a path, and like we feel like that's important. And the more that we recognize it, and the more that we start to orient ourselves in our lives in that regard, then we start seeing all of these odd coincidences that add up. And I call you up and I'm like, Nick, you're not going to believe this, man. She said LCC. How could that be a coincidence, dude? There's no way. Like, that's a coincidence. And like something else happens that you're like, dude, there's no way that's a coincidence. And I think it's an interesting thing that you said about it being like magic, you know, but what is magic? You know, how did it come into existence? Well, we brought it into existence through that experience, and through those experiences that we have that are unexplained. And we just called it magic. We used language to call it magic, right? But the fact of it is that there does feel something within our species that's a little bit different in that regard, that we feel like there's this manifestation of a purpose on a path. And if you don't, he talks a little bit about like just like he was using a visual of like looking around at people on the plane and what they preoccupy themselves with, and like the looks on their faces, and how they just look preoccupied with things that ultimately don't matter. And it's, I
Yeah.
don't know, it's just an interesting book. And I think it's apropos for this cast, because we're talking in the beginning phases about like whether you're whether you need to consciously reset through a specific type of body movements to pay more attention to your kinetic movement and how your body operates through this time and space, or you're more conscious of the fact that the toxicity in your gut then goes to your brain, and the 70% of your neurotransmitters are actually made in your gut. So maybe you should pay some attention to, maybe you should do a reset and pay a little bit more attention to what you're putting in your body and how that's maybe changing how you orient yourself in this world. And then take it up to the mentality piece and say, well, like, if I'm not seeing, if I don't have a recognition of any kind of like intervention in my life or any kind of coincidences, or shit just isn't going right, or just feels like maybe that's a good time to do all of the above and just hit the reset button and try to look for that.
Yeah. Okay. So, and I think one of the common denominators in all of this is that there's these signals going on out there that can be readily picked up upon, but it requires a listening, right? A quietness of the body, of the mind, and it's really hard to listen if you're in pain. To listen if, back to, Maslow's hierarchy, if you're hungry or your job sucks and you're doing physical shit all day and it's just not fulfilling, or whatever, baseline needs are not being met, the likelihood of you hearing the signal probably less or so, because you're focused on these other things that are more important. But once you get to that point of self-actualization where it's like, hey, I'm listening, I want to live, you're feeling that you're yearning for something more, right? And that manifests in all sorts of different ways. But, that signal's out there. Well, how do you hear it? Well, it's hard to hear with all the noise. How do you de-insulate yourself from all those things? Thinking about the people on the plane, they're on their, looking on their Instaface, or they're watching a movie, which these are great things. I mean, don't get me wrong, but if you don't spend enough, I feel like if you don't spend enough time just listening, and trying to peel away some of the complexities that you've layered onto your life because society says you should do these things, or who knows, maybe you're addicted to them, or whatever that might be, or the foods, or almost like back to the fast, right? This is a way to kind of clearing out so that you can listen. And I think, I'm not saying that I'm an amazing person that could pick up on this adeptness to picking up on things, but I tell you what, man, like I feel like I find myself, and I bet you do too, as well. You find that you pick up on these signals more so because when I approach a conversation with somebody else, or I'm usually listening, and I'm not coming from a place of pain, or I'm just waiting for my time to talk. I listen, and usually when you listen close enough, you can pick up on subtle nuances or things that are like magic or coincidence, and you start connecting them because you have this calmness to approach the puzzle with. And I think there's something to that. And this book sounds really interesting.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep rolling with it, obviously, but I think listen, and you can almost listen for those coincidences too, and almost manifest them and bring them into existence. But I think that if you think of yourself as like a radio antenna, and all of the things that you mentioned were like, if you're in pain, or if like that being a static or something like that, or things that you said, you mentioned something along the lines, I'm not going to probably quote you right, but like removing, you said something about like kind of removing those distractions, if you will, or something that's like, so how do you look for that? I mean, I would say that if you're preoccupied with things that they give you that little tick in your mind, like everybody has a conscious like voice that tells them, like, we talked about it before, you're like, dude, I know this Zelda's not the, it's fun, it's good for a time, but everybody goes through those moments where you're like, I know this is noise, this is just static, this is a preoccupation. So like understanding what is worthwhile versus a preoccupation. You probably need a little bit of both. People need preoccupation if it gives you flow state, or if you can somehow assign it value for your better well-being. But if it's something like that clearly doesn't align with your path and bring you in to your next step, removing that so you can get a clearer signal of what is that thing that's going to bring more alignment and more coincidence and more synergy into your life. What is that? That's why.
Well, here's one for that. Well, here's one for the coincidence. If you go on leftcoastcaveman.com and you go under mentality, I wrote a piece where where I went really deep into the Fibonacci sequence. I got just down the rabbit hole in this stuff. And, the title of it's The Simulation of Clarity, right? And one of the big takeaways was, and I outlined some of the key tenets of the Fibonacci sequence, the golden ratio, and how these things are these magical numbers, seemingly a code that's embedded in all creation. And it's really interesting. But being aware also that there's just as many, if not more, instances out there where these codes aren't found in nature, and they're not in the angles of flower petals, or the numbers of flower petals, or the dimensions of the humerus compared to the dimension of your femur. And so it got me thinking about, okay, well, that Fibonacci sequence and all this, it seems to be almost like a coincidence, right? And well, is it a coincidence because I'm just focused on it, hyper focused on that, and I'm ignoring the other, the converses out there? It goes back to like the confirmation bias, where you seek out information that only proves forward the thing that you want to prove forward, the thing that you like, oh, this is everywhere, and you ignore all the other information that might, pose some sort of conflict, and because that causes anxiety, and it also causes you have to learn more about it. And as you learn more about things, you start realizing how little you do know about these certain things, right? Back to like the Kruger-Dunning effect. And so the whole point of that piece is just to critically examine content and have an open mind when you're reviewing these things. And you can look at the Fibonacci and say, hey, that's a law, and that's it's planned, it's freaking godlike. Or you can say, hey, maybe that's a coincidence, and these coincidences add up, and maybe I'm missing certain information. So it's just, I don't know, it's funny because this, I feel like, has a direct connection to that, and in seeing the coincidences out there and in your interpretations and how you want to allow it to lead your life. And I mean, I'm not saying that the Fibonacci sequence is bullshit, but I'm saying it's interesting, it's fun, and it's dude, I mean, I don't know if I said it the other day, but I was in with a barber shop, and they had an orchid in the bathroom. And dude, I was in there counting flower petals on the orchid.
You straight up Jim Carrey, 23.
Yeah. And once that orchid didn't follow suit with the Fibonacci, I'll admit, man, I almost tore one of the freaking petals off. That's how crazy these things are. But yeah, so there's magic out there. And is that magic? I don't know. The verdict's still out, but once again, I think it's important to like remain somewhat critical in the information you absorb and like your conclusions, and allow it to always be a working piece, right? And that was kind of the whole point of that article I wrote, is just critically examining information and how you come to your conclusions.
Yeah, I like the little, the conclusion that you have at the end too. Seek openly the harmony of all things, while questioning the unabashed curiosity of a 7-year-old. As these questions often lead us further to understanding the known and the unknown. Become companions with the converse and the conventional fact. The instigation of debate and the humility found in acknowledging gaps in understanding. The indefatigable pursuit of knowledge calms the frenetic vibrations of the untethered mind. That's pretty deep stuff. I mean, I think that, and you mentioned Da Vinci in here, who was a Rosicrucian, and which they certainly delve into the golden ratio and sacred geometry and these kind of things. And yeah, I mean, you could read into it, but I think that at the very base level, in terms of like a cave implementation or a cave meditation, would be something like, you don't need a master's degree and you don't need to be a 7th level Rosicrucian and like study the occult practices and all these things to understand what's bringing you alignment in your life and what's bringing you chaos. And I think like the principle behind any of these things is order. And I haven't read too far into the Fibonacci sequence, but it seems to me like it's saying that there's like a divine orchestration or a divine order, and like it's kind of in line with this coincidence of like, maybe there's something more to this, maybe there's a divine intelligence behind it that's bringing you along this path of life, but there's also the divine will and your ability to move within that space. And I think looking for those coincidences or those alignments and recognizing the abrasions and the things that aren't moving you forward. And it's like, it's not that difficult to know. It's like, it's not that difficult to know, like, what's, like, even this the fact that we align on this and we committed it to the calendar. We talked about that earlier. Commitment to the calendar, get people involved, and we started noticing, like, more will start happening for you. They call it the butterfly effect or whatever, manifestation or whatever. It's like, maybe it's just as simple as removing bullshit that doesn't need to be there and adding stuff that does need to be there. Left Coast Caveman left the meeting. Mic drop. On that note, I guess you're exiting the premises.
You ever try that on a conference call? You just, as soon as you hear something you don't like, you just drop it. You just
actually
turn
did
it
that.
off.
I did that. Yeah, that was the Monday that. Speaking of, I was going to see if you wanted to get a session in on Monday, this coming Monday. It's the day before I leave for Hawaii, but that was what happened that day before we rolled the, not last Monday, but the Monday before that. Heard something I didn't like on a conference call. See ya.
It's a strategy.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, my reception went bad. Bye. But I don't know, man. I feel like we could stay here for a while in this phase of talking about resetting. How to like. What do you like if you're in your beginning phase of your path, finding your X factor, finding your why, finding your ideal vision of life? There's a lot of things to uncover and a lot of topics to discuss, I would say, and it's an ongoing process. I think for a lot of people, it's an evolution, not necessarily a moment in time. I think I'm gonna kill it. You froze.
Yeah, I don't know if we're gonna use this the Google thing again, man. My internet's clean. I think it's the app.
Oh, really? That's a bummer.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same internet I use every time, so it's clearly it's fine. We'll figure it out, man. We're using checking out different apps and whatnot. So
we shall. All right, brother.
Yep. All right, good talk, man.
All right, cool. See ya.